What's up, everybody? Welcome back inside the Horseshoe. It is the Monday after Ohio State 52, Wisconsin 21, an absolute drubbing in the cathedral behind me. That's the 40-year vet, Tim May. I'm Spencer Holbrook. Let's break it down, Tim, shall we?
Yeah, sure, man. Bottom line, Ohio State picked up where it left off against Toledo, going into its Big Ten opener against vaunted Wisconsin. Number one, let's couch it with this. This is not one of the great Wisconsin teams,
No.
Okay? I think you agree with me on that. Anybody can see that. But number two, Ohio State just treated it like another day at the office. Offensively, took the ball, drove right down the field, is all I like to say, clickety-clack, right down the track. And then defensively, got after Wisconsin with a few exceptions. And then, of course, it was like you and I talked about on Saturday night, or late Saturday night, in our little rapid reaction show. It was kind of interesting to see Wisconsin leave its starters in there on offense just to get Braylon Allen, their vaunted running back, over the 100-yard mark. Of course, he had that big, long touchdown run, which pretty much sealed the deal for him. And they end up with 21 points, 14 of them coming in the fourth quarter when this game had been well decided before that. But bottom line, another, in my opinion, step forward for the Ohio State offense in this game, going against a quality opponent. And then defensively, it does look like that 4-2-5 is up to the challenge.
Absolutely, Tim. And I think that's where we can kind of start a little bit. Is we talk so much about this offense right now because it's just clicking, and without Jackson Smith and Jigba, you didn't really know exactly who was going to step up at the beginning of the year, but that's already figured out. But let's start on the defensive side. A lot of questions when Jim Knowles was introduced. I mean, thinking all the way back to December, January, February. How will this defense adapt to the Big Ten? Can a 4-2-5 work in the Big Ten? Yeah. And can you defend? I mean, you look at the schedule this year: Iowa, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Michigan, all teams that want to physically pound you and run the ball. Can this 4-2-5 work? Well, the first test I don't think was the most difficult test of that with Wisconsin, but it did work. And that's the first true sign that a Jim Knowles defense can kind of adapt and be flexible against any offense, because you saw them have a lot of success against Notre Dame, which is a multiple offense. They kind of do a little bit of everything. You saw them have success against,
Excuse me.
But they do a lot of nothing with a little bit of everything. But then you saw them have success against a scrambling quarterback in DeQuan Finn, who got him a little bit, but I think by and large we would agree they did a good job. Well, now you've seen them against a power running game with 3 tight ends on the field, stay with 2 linebackers on the field and still be able to get it done.
Yeah.
That leaves me to believe that, the Iowa test will be the same way. Northwestern's terrible, but whatever Michigan decides to do, Ohio State will be able to defend it with 2 linebackers if it wants to. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this Wisconsin game, other than this offense is good, is that a 4-2-5 can work against a power Wisconsin team, and I think it can work in the Big Ten.
Yeah, Ohio State's biggest test between now and Michigan, in my opinion, is going to be the trip to Penn State in a month.
Yeah.
Penn State, they struggled early. I don't even know if struggle's the right word with Central Michigan, but then took care of that game. Bottom line is Penn State is I think is improved from a year ago. So that's going to be this team's acid test. It does look like, just looking at the way things have gone, Michigan State doesn't seem to be the same team it was a year ago when it was riding high behind Kenneth Walker Jr., the transfer. Obviously, he's not there anymore. They're having their problems. But getting back to this defense, dude, the last 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago, Ohio State did not have 2 starting safeties available, Josh Proctor and Tanner McAllister. They had 2 fellas step in, Lathan Ransom and Cameron Martinez, and didn't skip a beat, in my opinion, against Toledo. This past week, they didn't have their 2 number 1 cornerbacks, in Denzel Burke with a broken bone or something in his hand, needed surgery last week. They kind of kept that on the QT. Thought he was going to get to play with a pad on his hand. Then they opted out, before basically before pregame warm-up started, really. That just wasn't going to work for him. Could work in the next week, this coming week against Rutgers. But you got Jair Brown and Ja'Kalen J.K. Johnson start at the cornerbacks to basically, maybe a second team and a third team cornerback when you consider Jordan Hancock is still on the mend from that hamstring pull. I mean, you talk about plumbing the depths of a defense is still coming up big time. That's exactly what this defense has done in the secondary the last couple of weeks. And like we remarked on Saturday night, and I'll repeat it, I'm stunned. Wisconsin either didn't have the knowledge or didn't have the wherewithal to test those two corners, those two first-time starting corners. That was kind of stunning to me that they didn't get to the edges, try to throw to the edges a lot more in that game than they did. But I thought those two guys played extremely well, Johnson and Brown, and we'll see where it goes from here.
It's very apparent, very obvious that Paul Chryst and that Wisconsin offense do not trust Graham Mertz to do anything other than throw to tight ends and maybe the occasional out route. I mean, that was made very clear that you didn't challenge Jair Brown and J.K. Johnson more. But for Ohio State, because that's who we cover here, Tim, when you talk about the corners, only having 3 scholarship corners is really bad right now for Ohio State. It's a very large concern, considering you need more than 3 corners to get through a football season and win a national championship. I expect Cameron Brown will be back eventually soon. I expect Denzel Burke will heal up and be back. Jordan Hancock, we have no idea. But in the meantime, Tim, Rutgers just threw 2 pick sixes on Saturday against Iowa. Their passing attack is one of the worst in the country. It's absolutely dreadful. And I'm not the medical expert, nor am I head coach Ryan Day, but I see no reason to rush any of these corners back. You've got Jair Brown, who obviously was making an imprint, starting to make an impact in practice, who lost his black stripe early in the process this training camp.
Yes.
You've got J.K. Johnson, who some people were raving about heading into this preseason, who's finally starting to not only get his feet wet, but kind of dive in there and play a full game. Those two are building confidence, and you already are thin at corner no matter what. There's 6 scholarship cornerbacks on this roster no matter how you cut it. But if you want to build depth, because there's really no such thing as depth when you have 6, but if you want to build depth, those other guys can probably rest on Saturday. Jair Brown, J.K. Johnson, if they get their second start against Rutgers, I know it's Wisconsin and Rutgers, 2 bad passing teams. But that's how you build confidence, and that's how you build depth. So if you need Jair Brown against Georgia, or you need Jair Brown against Michigan, you absolutely need him. Yeah. That's a confident kid who's got 2 starts, who understands what he needs to do, and he can go in there and play. I think this is almost a blessing in disguise for this team to get Jair Brown and J.K. Johnson a start under their belt in front of 106,000 people.
It's always a blessing in retrospect.
Yes.
The coaches would prefer not to have these kind of blessings, deal with these kind of blessings. And then a guy that you left out of the mix there when you were talking about, the scholarship corners, he's like almost their Swiss Army knife kind of dude in the secondary right now is Cam Martinez. Cam Martinez can play corner. They've got maybe another safety or 2 that they could switch over there in tough situations. Heck, Tanner McAllister could probably play corner against some of the competition. And that's not a slam on Tanner McAllister. I like where he is. Mm-hmm. I mean, the dude comes up with the pick the other night that really tipped this game irrevocably Ohio State's way.
Yes.
It was crazy. They've gotten 2 picks now in the last 2 games, so it is coming around. They're answering that final question about this defense. But can you get turnovers? Yes. The answer is yes. But the bottom line is they've got some guys that can be stopgap measures. Let's put it that way. And I think Cam Martinez could probably play corner on a lot of teams around the country. What's interesting is I thought we might see him in that game the other night, and we didn't. It was pretty much the Jair Brown, J.K. Johnson show throughout. And because they, number one, their first starts, and number 2, they needed the reps, as you pointed out. So, yes, in retrospect, in the rearview mirror, what a blessing that was for the defense. Just like a week before, what a blessing it was for the defense to get those 2 safeties in there. You would prefer to be full strength, though.
Yeah.
He said, stating the sun is hot also.
Well, the sun's about to come up behind us.
Yes,
here,
it is.
On the eastern end of Ohio Stadium. It's a beautiful fall morning, Tim, by the way. We usually touch on the weather at the beginning of the show, but I figured I would add it. There's few clouds in the sky.
No, this is another beautiful football day. Too bad it's a Monday morning.
I know. Well, Saturday afternoon, Ohio State will play Rutgers in this building for homecoming at 3:30. We can get into that a little later, but I think this offense, Tim, as we transition here on the Monday after, I don't want to call it unstoppable, because we tried to do that a little bit at times last year, and then you ran into
this is different.
And you ran into 4th down issues against Oregon. You ran into issues, let's just keep it that way, against
Michigan.
Against Michigan, you ran into issues trying to run the football -1 long run by Travion Henderson in the Penn State game. The better defenses this team played last year, the offense regressed. Maybe regressed to the mean because they didn't regress below the mean by any stretch. They still scored a lot of points.
Yeah.
But
not as many as they needed to, because as we pointed out, against Oregon and Michigan, their 2 losses, they only scored 27. They led the nation last year in scoring with 45 or 47.5, whatever the number was. They led the nation, except in those 2 games. And those are the measurement games.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can talk about, like Ryan Day would even tell you, you can talk about stats all you want. I keep coming back to this. This is as good an offense as I've ever seen at Ohio State. I'm talking about this present day 2022 offense with the double shot at running back with Dallin Hayden coming on strong as that third guy. The running, and with this offensive line blocking the way it is, Donovan Jackson is going to be an All-American by the end of this year if he keeps it up, for example. The offensive line looks like a true offensive line, the way it's playing, the way it's moving guys out. Like you were just kibitzing with one of the guys leaving the field the other night. I mean, they handled that Wisconsin front,
with ease.
The defensive front, basically with ease.
Yeah.
And every front's got to have a few moments where it has some success getting to the quarterback or whatever. But for the most part, that was a fairly clean pocket for C.J. Stroud and some nice running lanes for Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson. There's not a whole lot more you can ask for from an offensive line.
Yeah, and I think, Tim, that's the point I was going to make, and I'm glad you made that for me, because this is different. This offense is simply different from what it was a year ago. Last year they had trouble running the football. They had 2 tackles playing guard. I think that's one of the great mysteries of my 4 years covering this team, is having 2 tackles play guard, and taking the running game with it, I guess.
I don't know. I thought it looked pretty good on paper.
Yeah, on paper, but the game's not played on paper, and it's obvious to see that the offensive line needed some changes, and it got them this offseason, and you're starting to reap the benefits of those changes. You've got guys pulling around, in short yardage situations to clear running lanes for Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson. You've got a harder running, I think he looks a little bit more in shape, Mayan Williams, who looks like one of the best backs in the Big Ten. I think he's having a better season right now than Travion Henderson. That's not to say Travion's not playing well, because he is. They both went over 100 yards, but Mayan's running on a different level right now. This offense, simply put, is just different, Tim, than it was a year ago, and that includes a better C.J. Stroud. I think he didn't have his best stuff on Saturday on the rewatch. That was apparent. Got away with a couple, including could have been pick 6 at the beginning of the second half. But you look at the ways they can beat you, Tim. You got the tight end, you got the receivers, the running backs. I mean, I don't see a hole right now, and we thought the tight end was going to be the weak link of this weak link. Easy for me to say, of this offense, but man, I mean, Cade Stover.
To me, it's interesting. I mean, Cade Stover made that switch to tight end. Basically his call. Was he going to stay on defense and kind of be in that mix at linebacker where there's seems to be way too many guys and there are spots to play, right? Yeah. Was he going to switch over to tight end where they could definitely use him from an athletic standpoint? But he is so upgraded himself as a tight end in the last 9 months. It's crazy. And now you've got a guy running around out there, 6'5", 265 pounds, with great athletic ability, who can catch the ball, who is not afraid to run over people. I'm going to let you interrupt me in a minute. I'm just holding off. But every week he looks more and more like maybe in contention for maybe being one of the elite tight ends in the country.
He's built like a Watt, like how the Watt brothers in the NFL are all built. Yeah. You see number 8 jog out there, and he's got that big elbow brace on. Yeah. Like you always see those 3 brothers, Derek, TJ, and JJ. And I'm not saying he's on that same skill level, because those guys are all, 2 of them are all pros. Yeah, but Cade Stover is built like one of those guys. Yeah. And to see him do it all like at tight end, to be able to throw his body around and block, I think he took a Wisconsin defensive end and dispatched of him, pretty easily on a pancake block on a nice Travion Henderson run that really opened up a lane. You saw him catch passes. I will admit, and I don't care how you get them, Ryan didn't really scheme those up for him. You act like C.J. Stroud's going to run into the end zone and then just throw it over the top to Cade Stover.
But the way that was executed, Cade sold his block, whatever, and then he just late release and he's wide open. I mean, what stunned me, well, not stunned is maybe not the right, but I was very surprised. And it was such a great scheme like you're talking about. They had him out wide. I mean, I'm not talking about in the slot. They had him out as wide as you can get.
I thought so. There was one point, Tim, he was splitting out wide.
He was almost out of bounds. He split out wide so far.
I thought he was going to leave the field and come out of the game.
And Wisconsin clearly had no answer for that. But what it did, and I wrote about that for LettermenRow.com, what it did was it opened up these other lanes for especially Emeka Egbuka, crossing routes and things like that they also exploited. Marvin Harrison Jr. to a certain extent, although Marvin Harrison Jr. drew double coverage almost all night last night or almost all night 2 nights ago. It was crazy, the attention he drew, but it just opened things up so wide, and I'm going, this was, okay, genius is, maybe you should never use the word genius when you're talking about football plays.
Yeah.
You know, they're not going to Mars. But the bottom line is, it was, in a football realm, it was genius what they did with him. And it just, imagine the defense coordinator right now at Rutgers, or the defense coordinators down the road, all of this stuff they're trying to digest that this Ohio State offense has thrown at them in the first 4 weeks of the season. I don't know how you ever prepare for it all. It's almost like, hey, let's get out there and let's just do the guard the shoreline and make them go the long way.
Yeah, Tim, I think that's a good point, trying to scheme this thing up. And one of the things I always try to do, which is a fool's errand, I promise it's not a good idea, folks, but I do it anyways because I'm just an idiot. I always try to
you do live in Grove City. I'm just
Let's
joking.
not give that joke away.
That's a joke.
Let's not give that away. We don't need the folks knowing
One of the
where I live.
fastest growing cities in Ohio, by the way.
We don't need the folks to know where I live. But anyways, one of the things I always try to do is look ahead at what Ryan Day is going to do next. And I knew they were going to end up sneaking Cade out for a pass, even though you can't defend that. But it was very obvious that was going to happen when you get into the eye like that. You know,
yeah.
Kind of like the Mitch Rossi leak last year against Rutgers. It was you could see it coming. If everybody was collapsing down, you could see him sneaking out and getting a touchdown catch. Now I'm looking at Cade Stover split out all the way on the sideline, and I think to myself, well, some team is going to be stupid enough to put a corner out there on him. And I think that's an easy jump ball that Cade Stover's willing to win. And another team is going to be willing to put a linebacker all the way out there on him. And then I think you just hand the ball off and let Trayvon Henderson and Maya Williams go to work with probably what looks like a 5-man or even a 6-man box.
That's what they did the other night.
And you win.
Yeah.
And so there are new layers coming is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
If you think that you've seen it all for this Ohio State offense, I promise you haven't. Cade Stover, and I think it's not just because of the skill level of C.J. Stroud. It's not just because you have to double team Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka. It's not just because when Jackson Smith-Njigba comes back, you're going to see as good of an offense in college football that I've ever seen.
I think it's pretty good right now, bud.
I know, but getting the best
Julian
receiver,
Fleming.
Oh yeah, his emergence is going to force defenses to have to account for him as well as Marvin Harrison Jr. in those slots and on those outsides. But I think the biggest key to this offense is just the craziest thing to say, considering he played linebacker, 9 months ago in a Rose Bowl. But Cade Stover is unlocking a part of this offense that we had not seen under Ryan Day yet.
Correct.
And that includes his 2 years as offensive coordinator. That includes the 2019 magical season that could have ended up with a national championship with Justin Fields and Luke Farrell and Jeremy Ruckert. It's crazy that Cade Stover is the guy who unlocks it all, but it's just the reality.
Yeah, but as C.J. Stroud calls him, that Swiss Army knife, as Ryan Day has pointed out, how versatile he is. I keep going back to this. He was the Mr. Football of Ohio in 2018. He doesn't even remember how many touchdowns he scored. He scored so many for Lexington. Basically never left the field. He got his first 2 touchdowns in college football the other night, which is pretty interesting, And now work a tight end into this mix of having to deal with a tight end in the passing game. I mean, as you were just naming off all of these options, you didn't even name them all off. That's what a ridiculous flow sheet that Ryan Day and his coaching staff are dealing with right now. Well, what do you do? I mean, what do you? I mean, when I wrote that story about the I formation last week, they didn't just put in the I formation to run power between the tackles.
No.
There are 100 plays out of that formation, it looks like, for them. That's the way you put in something. But the depth they go to install stuff, to me, is stunning. And it did not used to be that way in college football and at Ohio State. I mean, they have They have a very complex running game, and they have a super complex passing game. And when you mix those two, wow, what a cocktail.
And then, Tim, like I said, I always try to look ahead at what Ryan Day might do next with this offense. You also have G. Scott on the field a lot with Cade Stover. G. Scott can catch the football. We know that. You've got Mitch Rossi, who has shown that he can catch the football. If you start to pay attention to Cade Stover, guys, G. Scott's going to beat you. If you start to pay attention to Cade Stover, Mitch Rossi can even beat you a little bit. And then there's the probably about 307-pound elephant in the room. That is, Josh Fryer is an extra offensive lineman on the field. Maybe we even see him get something going there.
Wearing Keith Byers' old number, 41.
And Donovan Jackson's old number, too. They could have done it with Donovan last year. Simply, suffice to say, Tim, there's a lot of options for this Ohio State offense. There's actually a lot of options for this Ohio State defense, too. I think that unit continues to build depth, particularly in the secondary, but you're seeing, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Ty Hamilton on this show. I thought he played well Saturday night. I thought, a couple other guys. Tyler Friday had his best game this year, I think. He's starting to get a little bit more comfortable. Cody Simon is still playing well. Tommy Eichenberg, that speaks for himself. He's playing at an All-American level. I think he will be an All-American this year for Ohio State. The depth of this team, I think it's the deepest team Ryan Day's had here. Last year they weren't very deep. They had a lot of guys, but they weren't experienced.
Yeah, there was no experience.
2020, COVID made it so you never had any depth ever.
Yeah.
2019, I think the top end of this roster was absolutely elite, but I don't think it was as deep. This is the deepest team Ryan Day's had. And I think that's going to get them a lot. It's going to take them a long way in Big Ten play as we get into October because, guys, October's here. October 1st, Ohio State Rutgers at 3:30 here in the Horseshoe.
Yeah, it's nice and cool right now. It's football weather, ladies and gentlemen. And the interesting thing is we get ready to sign off here. I'm like I said, I'm curious about what's the next step for this offense. And then number two, I'm curious to see how they're going to handle Rutgers because I think Rutgers is a pretty damn good defensive football team. Like you pointed out, everybody said, "Wow, Iowa scored in the 20s on them. How good are they?" Well, two of them, like you pointed out, were 2 pick sixes.
Yep.
That wasn't the defense. This defense plays pretty well for Rutgers. So Ryan Day will have another basically safe to crack this week. Like you said, defensively, the challenge for Jim Knowles and that staff is just don't give up a couple of big plays because they can handle this offense that's coming in here, I do believe. I'm talking about Rutgers offense. And so what will we see new this week? I'm not sure. Except Ryan Day, this is what gets me about him. It's in a good way. He likes to throw things out there in a game like this coming up. A new thing out there that, once again, you're going to have to deal with, just like against Toledo. They could have won that game against Toledo without the I formation and everything they ran out of it.
Yep.
But no, they wanted to try it against an opponent that is game planned against them and stuff. So what's coming next, that's going to be the intriguing thing from this offense because, like you just say, once you think you've seen it all, they throw something else out there.
How weird is it, Tim, that we're going to probably talk more highly of the Rutgers defense than we will the Michigan State defense that's coming up on October 8th? But that's just
let me interrupt one quick thing. Schiano has gone about rebuilding the Rutgers situation in the right way. Number one, he's definitely dabbled in the transfer portal without a doubt, but he's trying to build it from the bottom up, just like this stadium is built and rebuilt. Ohio Stadium, you want concrete, man. If you can concrete and steel. And I think he's gone about the right way, but it's still a project. He even said that post-game after the Iowa game, he can see the progress. He goes, but you don't declare it because until you actually win those kind of games, you're still a work in progress. You're still trying to get there. There's no beating your chest about, well, look how far we've come. No moral victories. But the bottom line is you can see how much more, quote, competitive Rutgers is than it was 3 or 4 years ago. I think that's undeniable.
Yeah, so we'll see that competitive, improving Rutgers program inside the Horseshoe on Saturday at 3:30. Tim, it should be another fun atmosphere. The Ohio State crowd was absolutely rocking Saturday night. I think we should give a hat tip to the 105,000, 106,000 folks who showed up and were loud and wore black on Saturday night. This place dresses pretty nicely in black, I will admit, Tim. But that's Tim May, the 40-year vet. I'm Spencer Holbrook. You'll see us back here on Saturday in the Horseshoe for Ohio State and Rutgers at 3:30. And we'll be back in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center on Tuesday and Wednesday for practice reports. Those will be presented by Byers Auto, driven by them, in fact. But again, that's Tim. I'm Spencer. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Subscribe below, and we'll see you guys in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center on Tuesday.